I've been very vocal as of late about my disdain for Nintendo's practices in the current day, but I feel as if I've been too aggressive with that narrative, or at the very least, I've been channeling my criticism incorrectly. After watching this video by Game Maker's Toolkit, I've come to further realize that they're obviously listening to player feedback, but I can't help to shake the feeling that there's still a misunderstanding between Nintendo and their fans. By the way, this can happen with any other dev. I'm just using Nintendo as an example because I'm more familiar with them than any other developer. Nintendo is a company with the wherewithal to create highly replayable and rewarding experiences with the games that they make, but as of late, it's been hard to justify the choices they've been making from the perspective of a longtime fan. For example, one of the most contested additions to their games as of late has been the introduction of item durability. In Breath of the Wild, I can understand why it would be an attractive feature to add as a developer. It encourages players to think about the weapons they have in their inventory more and gets them to swap them out more often. That being said, as a fan, I question the route they took with it. Because of the sheer amount of weapons there are in the game, getting new weapons is very easy, and because of this, getting a weapon as a reward feels significantly less, well, rewarding. Especially since there is rarely a meaningful difference between the weapons that you just stumble upon and the weapons that you really work to get. Common sentiment shared amongst fans is that the addition of item durability to Breath of the Wild isn't necessarily a bad idea, but it doesn't feel fully fleshed out. The idea of adding a blacksmith to repair damaged or broken weapons, as well as grant weapon-specific modifiers, is tossed around often in the circles that I frequent, as well as giving us the ability to see item durability. In my eyes, these additions would represent the best middle ground between keeping the integrity of what I think the devs were going for and making the player feel better about getting weapons. Experimentation would still be encouraged, but it would do a lot towards making weapons feel less like paperweights. That being said, there's also another sentiment shared amongst fans, the idea of getting rid of item durability altogether, which is something I don't really agree with, to be honest. Players would default to finding the strongest weapon available at that time and then never replacing it until they find a weapon of that exact same type with a higher damage number. There'd be no reason to experiment. You could make it work with significant modification of the game's base mechanics, but at that point I feel like it'd be a majoritively different game. Now, I just described 3 different viewpoints: the devs, a portion of the fan base, and a smaller portion of that portion of the fan base. All of them have their own reasons for thinking the way they do about the item durability mechanic, stemming from the way they perceive the game. And so, I ask, who's right? Some may side with the fans that want the item durability system to be reworked, and while I generally would like to agree with those people, I do admit that there are certain problems with that approach, mainly stemming from the fact that it would take a large amount of time and money to add and balance a slew of mechanics to benefit an already existing mechanic that works well enough. Maybe when I phrase it like that, you start to think that the devs are correct. They most likely shipped the game knowing that the item durability mechanic wasn't ideal, but accomplished what they wanted in an acceptable way after all. And then what about the fans who want the item durability mechanic removed outright? Surely it must be completely fine to just disregard what they say, right? I don't fully think so. Sure, taking away the item durability mechanic would most likely break Breath of the Wild as we know it, but most likely the disdain for the mechanic as a whole stems from them not fully being comfortable with how far away from a quote-unquote traditional Zelda game Breath of the Wild is. Instead of dungeon items, we have runes. Instead of heart pieces, we have spirit ore, etc., etc. I don't agree with their suggestion, but I understand what they're going for and where they're coming from, and because of that, I don't feel like it's fair to just completely ignore what they have to say. So again, I ask, who's right? Well, for me, it's come down to no one and everyone.
Wow, what a vague answer!
Essentially, what it all boils down to is that there's no definitive answer in this situation. As fans, we can't really concretely say what would be the best for the game when we don't have the means to create what we envision ourselves, and most likely the devs themselves are in a similar position. They likely aren't going to be given the chance to work on a game that's already sold very well far after release unless there was already DLC planned that far in, or unless the game itself was going to be re-released. From a business standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to do anything like that otherwise. And while that does bug me slightly, I can't really say that that's evil or anything like that. The only thing that we can really do as fans in this situation is trust the developers to make the games that they think they should make, and when we think that something goes against that, we should speak out respectfully. None of that demeaning, canceling, death threat bullshit. Use your words like an adult and treat the devs with the respect that they deserve as people. Back to the point. I think it's fair to say that with cases like Breath of the Wild, there is no definitive correct answer. But I also think it's fair to say that not every game is like Breath of the Wild. Like Animal Crossing. Now, if you haven't been on the internet for the last 2 months, and if you haven't, let me just say, you are so goddamn lucky. Animal Crossing New Horizons has been another installment in the long list of games that have been marred by choices that aren't really justifiable, amongst other things. From a gameplay standpoint, there are very few issues that I have with New Horizons. I've only been a fan of Animal Crossing since New Leaf, but I can very comfortably say that New Horizons is a much more enjoyable experience, with caveats. The majority, but not all, of the problems that New Horizons faces have nothing to do with the gameplay itself, but more so the menuing. The menuing in this game is very unfortunate. The menus themselves were obviously made with care, but from the standpoint of a player, they cause more frustration than they have any right to, really. There was actually a wonderful photo direct that was made that highlights some of the more specific things that would make Animal Crossing New Horizons a better game, but what I'm trying to get at here is that sometimes from a gameplay standpoint, there is an objectively correct answer on what to do. Take this, for example. In New Horizons, you're able to gather manila clams to create bait that allows you to lure fish in whatever body of water you desire. This is an incredibly useful mechanic that signifies that the developers understand what they're doing. In theory, it's a major quality of life improvement that should make the experience of hunting down specific fish more enjoyable, but it kind of doesn't. Like, it can, but in reality, there are very few people I know who actually take the time to gather clams and craft bait because the entire process is extremely tedious. First of all, clams don't stack. That's right. If you want to gather a decent amount of bait, you're going to have to fill up the majority of your inventory slots with just clams, which seems counterintuitive when you're just trying to use them to capture fish, which also don't stack, but rightfully so in that case. Then, once you've sold your inventory to the clan gods, you have to actually craft them into bait. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Not until you realize that you can't craft multiple items at once in New Horizons, and that bait is crafted one at a time, unlike with fences. Even with the faster crafting speed that was gifted to us in the 1.1 update that I'm thankful for every day, crafting a full stack of bait takes an astronomical amount of time, and a full stack of bait only amounts to 10. I still don't understand why the item stacks in this game are so goddamn small, but that's not the point. Problems like these represent things that are just objectively wrong, even from the standpoint of the developer. Yes, the player can use this feature of the game. It is functional, but they're likely not going to. Not because it was intentionally meant to dissuade players, but because it takes away from the game in a way that's not meaningful. Even if the player uses a turbo controller to spam the A button to optimize the process in this situation, they're still waiting for a large amount of time to simply play the game. Crafting multiple items at once is essentially just the world's most uninteresting QuickTime event, which is saying something, and even before they get to that point, having clams rule over your inventory makes them less likely to enjoy other aspects of the game that have to do with picking up items, which is a gigantic problem in a game like Animal Crossing. In situations like these, I'm very comfortable with saying that the developers should improve a game by reworking it, especially since New Horizons specifically is so early into its lifespan that seeing quality of life improvements added via updates is very plausible. But then I realized in the middle of my sentence that we're talking about Nintendo, so that entire thing that I just said kind of just like flies into the void of uncertainty. In the end, what I want you to take away from this video is that a lot of the time, contested features that are brought to the table in a new game or are missing from it aren't necessarily wrong, and that it's okay to think more deeply about these things and bring up your ideas to the developer respectfully, as long as you understand their standpoint. That being said, I also think that certain developers should try to communicate with their fans on a more consistent basis. And also, sometimes they're just wrong. And there are a lot of those times with Nintendo specifically. And I'm still angrily awaiting Super Mario Party to get online board play support with additional boards. Come on. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for watching the video. Have anything to add? Maybe a mechanic that you think has been painted in the wrong light? Why not comment that down below? Did you like this video? If so, why not like it? And if you really like this video, and me, come on, why not subscribe, hit the bell to get notified for my next uploads, and follow me on Twitter and Twitch. My Twitch community is great, as always. That's about it. See ya.